Hello, I'm Cormac. You're listening to Queerly Beloved, supported by Amazon Music. In this series, I invite DJs and musicians, friends and allies from the LGBTQ+ community to talk about music, queerness, and anything else that shapes their unique story. It is my hope that in sharing our individual experiences, we can learn and grow and focus on our similarities rather than our differences. You can find all of the music mentioned in today's episode and each episode at the link in the episode description. In this episode, I'm talking to Lerato, also known as Lakuti. Lakuti is a legendary resident of Panorama Bar in Berlin and currently has a party series called Bring Down the Walls. In this episode, we talk about shebeens, and in case you didn't grow up in Ireland or South Africa, a shebeen is basically an illegal party space which have taken on new importance in South Africa. I learned a lot in this episode. We talk about Kirsten a few times. Kirsten is Lerato's wife, who is a legend in her own right, DJing under the name Tamasumo. So without further ado, here is me talking to Lerato, aka Lakuti. Thank you so much for
My pleasure.
For joining me.
I'm glad it could finally happen.
So I would firstly like to ask you to introduce yourself and tell me who you are, how you identify.
My name is Lerato and I DJ as Lakuti. I grew up in Johannesburg in Soweto. And it was a good upbringing and a culturally enriched upbringing despite living under apartheid. You know, obviously, there was a lot we had to endure as Black people in South Africa. And in some ways, that's all gone on paper, but the after effects of apartheid are still being felt throughout the country because you can change things on paper, but unless you implement the changes that are needed to kind of advance marginalized people, nothing changes. And sadly, it's over 20 years since we've seen the first democratic elections in South Africa, but things are actually getting worse in some respect for Black people in particular, especially post-COVID. COVID did a lot of damage to people. And unfortunately, the current government, the ANC, even though people fought so hard to put them in power, they've done nothing.
I'm interested to know, and your family bringing you up in that, I grew up in religious divide and there was a lot of bitterness on both sides. My family did quite a good job of kind of keeping me quite neutral, or educating me, but I wasn't really that politically motivated. They weren't very radical in that way. How were your folks with that?
I mean, my family, particularly my mom, I didn't grow up with my father. My mom and women played such a powerful role in shaping who I am. You know, my mom and grandmother were as my biggest inspirations. So they did a lot for us with very little money. I don't know how these women managed to send us my sister and I, to good schools. You know, they made do with very little and they've achieved so much. And I'm in great awe and admiration. So, yeah, we were not particularly politicized at home in a sense, but living under those conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I always say to people that always say, oh, but you're being political as Black people. But I'm like, it's not by choice. We are forced into being political given our situation. So you're lucky you have a choice to engage or not.
100%.
But my family was really, there's a lot of music in my family. And my grandfather was an avid jazz collector. And my grandmother used to be a shebeen queen back in the 50s in Sophiatown. So, and she used to run a jazz shebeen. She had a lot of writers and poets and musicians like Miriam Makeba drinking in her establishment, in her own home, basically. Growing up hearing these stories really inspired me to also want to continue on this legacy of providing space for people together and find solace in the creative world, and that is music, you know.
Yes.
My mother collected a lot of records back in the 70s, in particular Motown, your funk and disco records. She used to have a suitcase that she put them, and they will all be stashed on top of the old wardrobe, which is so funny.
Uh-huh.
And my grandfather had a really great jazz collection, which I inherited. The only thing I got from him
Wow.
when he died, because I don't come from wealth, I come from a working class family. So music was always around me all the time.
I'm just have a lovely vision of your mum pulling that suitcase from the top of the wardrobe, and you're thinking, okay, we're gonna have an evening. the joy of that, and I love hearing the word shebeen. I mean, you very kindly invited me to your shebeen recently, and you know, I haven't heard that word outside of Ireland, and it's interesting, this connection between
because in South Africa in particular, you know, the shebeens came about since the 1800s, I think.
Oh wow. Okay.
And they became even more prominent after the Liquor Act that was imposed on people. I think this was around the 1920s, where Black people couldn't acquire the licenses required to have an official drinking bar, and they were not allowed to drink in wide spaces. So women decided to open up their own homes, brew their own liquor. And the reason why I did the event, I was like, wow, we need to celebrate these women, because without them, musicians wouldn't have had the spaces to create and to share their music. These spaces also became places where people came to organize themselves, you know, around activism, to confront the conditions that were being imposed by apartheid. So kudos to these women, and we need to celebrate them, and people need to know how ingenious these women were.
Absolutely, and that pivotal role
Yeah.
that they play. We see that later as well, you know, in Stonewall, obviously, which is an obvious one, but also in civil rights as well. We see that where the dance floor is a place of revolutionary ideas, and it's like it can happen, and I still have hopes for that in today's situations. I've written a track about it before, and I've spoken about it, that, you know, I really hope that in our privilege and the comfort that we have at the moment as queer people on dance floors, I hope we haven't lost our spirit of creating change and thinking of people who aren't afforded those luxuries that we had, because we owe them that. We have to continue that. That's kind of why there's a certain magic to what we do in clubs as well. It's like, if we don't want to lose that. We don't want that people become so comfortable that they don't know that, or that they forget that.
And especially during these troubling hyper-fascist times, it's so important that musicians stand for something. It's not a throwaway thing. If done correctly, this could be so empowering and life-changing for many people, you know, and it shouldn't be only accessible to people with money. You know, this is my biggest worry right now. There's a study recently done in the UK that dance music is losing the working class. People with positions in dance music, their working class account for maybe 15%. And this is a worrying trend, and it's something that we should consider. Without the working class marginalized people, there wouldn't be clubbing and the culture around it as we know it. And it's so important to continue to make whatever change is necessary to be inclusive.
Something I really miss, like, you know, when I play in the States, and it used to happen quite a lot in London, like if I went to Queer Nation or clubs, I remember Queer Nation specific, but there was definitely...
I lived in Queer Nation.
Oh, did you? Okay, so we must have bumped into each other on the way to the toilet or something.
Glued to that dance floor, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's something... I loved it when I first moved to London for that reason, and I feel it in New York, especially in a different way, and people tell me Pittsburgh is really good as well. But you know, this feeling of contribution.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of going out in clubs now, and it's like,
Yeah,
who am I going to listen to? What am I going to take? Who am I going to fuck? What am I going to
yeah,
see? And it's all about what am I getting?
yeah, yeah,
And there's
yeah,
something about Queer Nation or something, or I mean, what I'm talking about is more Black community focused
yeah,
events where there is a celebration of what am I contributing? How are we looking after each other? How are you? And
yeah,
this sense of people coming together to find some medicine or to find some strength, to find some oasis away from things.
yeah.
It's hard to find sometimes.
It's interesting that you mentioned the States because I have to be honest, at the moment, I find so much enrichment and hope coming out of playing a lot in the US because I feel that sense of community a lot more than I am right now in Europe. Because in Europe, yeah, we have a very sophisticated way of approaching this, and we've been doing it for so long. And America was out in the cold for a while, but there's a really strong DIY queer clubbing thing that has been brewing in America. And it's beautiful to experience that and to see how motivated people are into trying to make a change. Like you mentioned, Pittsburgh, those honcho guys, I love them to bits because they've done so much. And the important thing is that they actually also listen to the community rather than just big themselves up on social media about what we stand for. I think we need more action and action rather than just
Virtue
paying
signaling.
lip service, you know. And
Yeah.
these guys, they don't often politicize or say anything; they just do. And I'm looking at the Queer Femme Fund thing they did for the Honcha Camp Out because in the first year the community was like, where were the Black community? Where were the trans women? We need these people to also be present. They started this fund where people with money can contribute towards those that don't have the money
Mm-hmm.
to come and also share in the experience. And we played there for the first time and went to Camp Out last year. And it was such a beautiful and moving experience for me. And to also see some of those people that came through the Queer Femme Fund now also partaking in how the Queer Femme Fund operates. And it just, those kind of things really are the exact things that need to be happening on a larger scale to ensure that nobody feels left behind because they can't afford to be a part of something, you know?
I love that concept of putting your money where your mouth is, literally.
Mm-hmm.
It's very good. You know, we haven't spoken about music at all.
It's coming, it's coming.
Those early days in Soweto and being exposed to music, is there a record that comes to mind, maybe from your grandfather's jazz or your mum's suitcase on top of the wardrobe? Is there a record that you could say reminds you of those times, that sums it up?
I mean, one of those records is Barry White's Never Ever Gonna Give You Up. That was my mom's tune. That was
That's a
my
tune.
mom's go-to, you know. And also my grandfather, when I was about 7, bought me 2 records, and that was a B.B. King album,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of R&B in the old school way, and funk and blues, and Kaifas and Letambulu album.
Okay.
Every Sunday, my grandfather would sit there with his brandy
Yeah.
and bring out the stash of records, cleaning them, and I would bring my 2 records that he bought for me
Oh,
and sit there with him and do this. So that was our ritual. So yeah,
oh, I love that. Barry White's a fascinating artist, you know, because
yeah,
when you think of like some of the music that he made, you know, if anyone else had sang it, like there's a sexiness to him. If anyone
yeah,
else had sang
yeah,
it, it would have maybe sound like cheesy, almost not cheesy, but
yeah,
sleazy.
yeah,
And he was just so
yeah,
sexy.
yeah.
That voice is like, I always think
Yeah.
of him like in some way paving a way for Sade as well. Like I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
yeah,
she has that like
yeah.
elegant, classy sexiness that he had in a way. It's,
Barry was fantastic, and the music was so sophisticated because
Sophisticated. Sophisticated's the word, yeah.
the orchestral, sounds, the rich. Making music is really easy now because by those days you'd have to bring the whole entire orchestra into the studio. This guy was just a genius on so many levels.
And there's no pissing around with autotune or anything. You either had it or you hadn't.
Yeah.
Was your family religious or
Not fanatically religious, but I grew up Catholic. I mean, my mom is very religious now, which is fascinating for me to see. I mean, I went back home last year after missing 2 years because of COVID. It was interesting to see how religious my mom has become. It kind of shocked me in a way. Yeah, she's in the Catholic Women League and all that. I'm not religious, even though I went to a convent, all girls school. But even then, I always questioned the role or the lack of participation in the emancipation of Black people by the church itself. So I always approach religion with a lot of doubt and questions. And we, in fact, agreed that we respect each other's space. It's something that brings solace to her, and I understand, but it's nothing to do with me,
Yeah, totally. I mean, I often call myself a recovering Catholic because I also grew up in that, and I also had a lot of questions, and maybe also it's part of being an outsider to who they welcome. As queer kids, we're not especially welcome within that.
Yeah.
And maybe one of the blessings of that is not really finding your footing in it.
Yeah.
We had reason to question it, I guess.
Also, being an outsider allows you to see things holistically in a way and with a larger and wider lens. And it's important to question things because if we didn't question things, we'd not arrive at the truth.
Absolutely. And I used to very much resent religion growing up as well. Like in my teens, I was really pushing it away, and I blamed a lot of it for the homophobia that I experienced in my family. But towards the end of my mom died a few years ago, and towards the end of her life, she was as religious as she'd always been. But I just saw it as like, oh, she gets some peace of mind from that. And
of course.
It totally changed for me. I would even sometimes when I would visit her, she would ask me to go to mass with her, and I would just go. Whereas in the past, I just would never have gone. But I just thought, oh, it works for her. So
because it also in the Black perspective, I mean, a lot of Black people were working hard and struggling, and this idea of church on a Sunday, it's where they could put on their best clothes and gather. And feel a sense of belonging. So on that aspect, from that perspective, I understand it. And I think we need to give grace to one another in some ways. And it's not, you are wrong, I am right. We all have our ways of arriving at peace. I love my mom, and I know that she's approaching it from a humanity perspective, And so it's her thing, it's not mine. I do my thing, she does her thing.
Was there a time when you maybe realized, I'm a bit different here in this family? Was there I'm kind of hinting towards realizing or recognizing your queerness growing up in a somewhat religious, heteronormative family? Did you have any queer people around you?
I mean, not in my family, at least not. Maybe there were, but they were not just saying it because in South Africa, even now, we have intense patriarchy, So queerness is just still very much frowned upon, even though we have a constitution that is so powerful. We've had gay marriage for longer than most European countries, but yeah, it's driven by patriarchy and religions that are still very much homophobic. So it's quite interesting because when I think about it, from a very young age, I knew there's something different about me, but you can't put it into words and you don't know what it is. But I always felt that there was something. And honestly, seeing Sylvester on television as a young kid was very powerful to me because I didn't quite understand this character, but there was something about them that I kind of related to, and hearing what people were saying about him, and they were not good things, made me sad. But I was also really intrigued by this larger than life character who seemed to not care what the world thought of him, but there was something really proud and regal about Sylvester. Seeing Sylvester perform on television for the first time really left a mark on me. And I guess that was me acknowledging or coming to terms with my queerness, even though I was so young.
And also, like Sylvester, that thing that is kind of religion's trying to capture, that being in the spirit, like Sylvester had that completely.
Yeah.
I guess you could call it like a gospel energy somehow.
Yeah.
He's in touch with it.
A lot of those people grew up in churches. They got into music through being in the church choir. So, I mean, he performed with Martha Wash and all of those people that were gospel singers. So gospel and religion played a role in how they then found their own way into music.
To see that, but then see like people are not really acknowledging that side of it, they're critiquing it. It's like, it's kind of confusing as a kid.
Because people like to box one another. They couldn't quite figure out where he belonged. So anything that shakes people's perspective of what a man or woman should be rubs certain people the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I think it was this ambiguous nature of his persona that confused a lot of people and made them angry.
Absolutely. And when you think of those characters, Sylvester, Boy George, I think you see it now. People talk about Sam Smith and their presentation, and it's an offense for a man to embrace the feminine. And it works the other way, maybe not to as much. I sometimes feel like because we live in a patriarchal system, men are less threatened by a woman taking on the guise of the masculine, like Grace Jones, obviously, Annie Lennox. But I mean, it's not that they have a smooth road of it either.
Because women's sexuality has never been made to be relevant in our society. And it's still that, women's sexuality is not threatening to people.
Yes.
As much as male sexuality is. Because men have to be men, It's such a crazy idea, and it's
horrible.
And it's a dangerous idea as well, because we see the effects of it in America playing out now with how trans people are being treated and vilified. And
And in music, when you've seen women take hold of that, they're persecuted for it. When they say my sexuality is powerful, they're absolutely
of course
berated for it. They're slut shamed.
Exactly, because women should know their place. According to these kind of crazy people.
I mean, you saw that with Nina Simone as well, like, how she was really stripped down for that. And
she was called crazy for speaking truth to power.
You know what? Because it's fear, and it's a woman's sexuality. This world we live in has formed this method of trying to control it. It's the most powerful thing. It has the power to heal. It's mother power, and I feel like on a spiritual level, people are like, the world is afraid of that. What if women came into their power? What the fuck would happen? And like all of these, like from the Cinderella to like Sleeping Beauty to the woman needs to be rescued. Like it's all tied up in like, we have your power. We will awaken you to your power. It's fucked up.
This is why you now see a drive by the Republican Party in America to control women's wombs now, to kind of try and tell women how to deal with abortion. And it's so scary to see these things play out again.
This is kind of why, I don't get involved in online spats, but I do observe things. And this is why it always rubs me up the wrong way when people say dance music isn't political, because I just think you don't. Yeah, for you it's not political because those
Mm.
particular issues don't affect you. Also, from queer people when they say, "Oh, I'm not really into politics," and I think, well, that's because it's not affecting you directly.
Yeah,
But you
yeah.
can't not be into it if you know the history of it. And
And whether you political or not, somebody else has done the work.
yeah,
You know, you can't erase that to make things possible. These possibilities that we have came from others' hard work, you know. These things didn't grow out of nothing. They come from somewhere.
it scares me a little bit sometimes, that the journey from hardship to trying to make things easier, sometimes when people have it easier, they're less motivated for change. And sometimes, like our forebearers having done that work and then things are more comfortable for us, it's quite easy, I think, for people to sit back and say, oh, it's okay. That
Yeah,
scares me a bit sometimes.
but that also goes with capitalism and the idea of being me, myself, and I
The
is
individual.
so detrimental to people growing in a positive way. In South Africa, we have a saying that umuntu ngabantu, which means a person is a person through others. So this idea that this is about me, it's something that has been negatively affecting how we relate to one another, on a daily basis.
I don't want to point fingers. It makes me think of the American Constitution that every man has the right to enterprise. And I think that's been the birth
Yeah, yeah,
of a lot of this
yeah.
idea of the individual's experience being the pinnacle of human experience. We forgot how to be a
Mm-mm.
community.
Because nobody that has achieved greatness did it on their own. That's lies.
Yeah.
There's always been somebody helping them towards reaching that success. We don't walk this earth alone.
And we experience that, I think, when we're lucky in any minority, when you find your chosen family, for
Yeah.
example, or if you have good roots with your family,
Mm-hmm.
we experience the power of that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's taken me like some years to learn to lean on that because I was so used to like self-solving things. And I've been indoctrinated with that idea of
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
it's all about what you do and how you heal yourself and all of that. And to learn to trust people and lean on them has been a
Yeah.
has been a journey. But
And showing weakness is frowned upon. Hyper capitalism frowns upon showing vulnerability. It's so important for us to be vulnerable because it means that we are feeling all these senses that come with being a fully realized human fucking being.
and that's where we connect. We
Yeah,
connect on our vulnerabilities. We don't connect on like, oh, you're perfect and I'm
yeah.
perfect. Like, what horrible party is that?
And there is no such a thing as perfection. It does not
Also,
exist.
your Sylvester story. Do you remember what Sylvester track it
Oh
might
my
have
God,
been?
what is it? It's one of the big
Mighty
Sylvester.
Real
Yes,
or
yes,
oh
you
really?
make me feel mighty real, of course. How did it end up on South African television? I think,
It was a massive
was
hit.
it could have been because we used to get top of the pop stuff
Uh-huh.
on our television sometime. So I don't know, but this was just, I was like, who is this character? And I also had the same kind of reaction and moment with Daryl Pandy
Oh yeah.
with Love Can Turn Around because,
That's a track.
again, a larger than life character coming out of nowhere, leaving people confused. I love those kind of
Yeah.
people.
What a voice.
Yeah.
Daryl has. I play an edit of that at the moment, actually. I really
Ah, cool.
I,
Yeah.
I really love it. My top of the pops queer moment, there have been a few, but I remember it must have been a rerun of Top of the Pops because the track was from before my music time. But I remember seeing Mark Allman's Soft Cell
Oh, yeah.
on Top of the
Oh,
Pops,
oh,
and I kind of hid behind the sofa because he didn't have that fluffy thing that Boy George had. He
yeah,
looked
yeah,
kind of like a deviant,
yeah.
eyeliner, all in black,
Uh-huh.
really camp. It looked kind of sexual. Boy George didn't really look that sexual. Like
Yeah,
grannies liked Boy George
yeah.
also. But Mark Almond looked like he was out in sex clubs. And I remember
Ah!
like
Yeah,
and I remember hiding behind the sofa because I was afraid of I was very small, and I remember thinking that's too close for comfort. That
yeah.
looks scary and it looks really familiar to me.
But it's exactly how I felt with Daryl Pandy and Sylvester, in that I couldn't quite work it out in my head what it was, but I felt something, but I couldn't express what I felt. I kept quiet because I felt ashamed and scared that I will be going against the grain in a way, because I was too young. I was too young to understand what was going on.
And did you find a queer community then there?
I will tell you how we grew up in the townships. There was a lot of queer activity. You just did not name it.
Mm.
I had a lot of
Did you find
same
it?
same sex experiences, but you just did not label it. And as soon as you started to develop feelings, then those people will just label you as a deviant, and they didn't want to know. So
Yeah.
it was always something that you kept to yourself, because you were scared to be outed and mistreated. And this is what a virulent patriarchal society does, is to out people and then target them. And there was a lot of that going around when I was growing up.
And there's a divide there, isn't there? There's like, okay, I'm doing this with you, but I'm not really queer. Like
Exactly. Yeah.
there's like a self-punishing denial in there. It's very heartbreaking. That must have been lonely in a way if you started to.
It was. But again, I immersed myself in music. When other kids were running around, I was making tapes, listening to music, writing lyrics to songs. And that kind of brought me to my peace. And I remember when I was at school, in high school,
Hmm.
uh, I went to my school library. And for some reason, I still cannot fathom how a Catholic run school ended up with those books in the library. I took out the Tales of the City by Armistead Maupin.
Oh yeah.
This was over my school holidays. I was obsessed with these books. My mom would be, "What are you reading? What is going on here that you can't put the book down?" And those books did so much for me, in that they opened up another world, and for me to see that there were people like me somewhere
Hmm.
out there. And that also kind of made me want to travel. I was like, when I'm older, I'm going to travel and go to San Francisco and meet these people and be like these people, the wonders of books.
And the thing about that volume of books is not only were they queer, they also had like a different way of looking at life.
Yeah.
There's a really beautiful quote from Armistead. I think it was in a later book, but he said something like, "Growing up in a straight family, they love you, but it's not a love you can lean on."
It's conditional.
So are you you're making tapes? Are you going to parties? Like when does that start?
I mean, parties. Actually, when I was 13, there was a daytime disco.
Uh-huh.
And 13, 14, 15, my friend and I used to, at first, we would get with our pocket, very little pocket money, that literally enabled us to just get a car, a taxi to town. We would go to this day disco, but they were not queer. And for a long time, I pretended not to be, to fit in. So I used to go to these parties. I loved it until my mother realized that we were going to clubs, instead of, we were saying, "Oh, we're going around to the shopping mall." No,
Ah,
we were
yeah.
going to party. And she stopped their pocket money, but we still, honestly, we didn't care. We'd
Yeah.
beg people in the streets to give us money so that we can get a taxi,
Uh-huh.
because the party was free. We just needed to get there and back.
I often remember like my first times going to raves. I was going to an illegal rave in my hometown, which was run by one of the paramilitary groups, and they didn't have an age limit. So I could go there and I could see like it was the first time I saw men hug, for example. But then now when I think of it, it was also, even though there was a lot of tension, it's run by
Mhm.
terrorists and there's a lot of like religious tension,
Oh.
There was also something about people drinking and taking drugs where everybody kind of let their guard down, and it was a little bit of
Yeah,
relief from that hypervigilance that I was developing as a queer kid.
yeah,
So I think there's a lot of safety to be found in those environments
yeah, yeah,
for us, even when we're not out.
yeah.
There's still a sense of relief somehow.
I mean, it's only when I left home really that I really, it was like a 360 for me. Because at home, my family were all about books, education. And when I left home, boy, did I kick that closet door wide open. I went wild. I remember going back home after 2 weeks of being at uni, turning up with a Mohican and dog collar. And my
Uh-huh.
mom was like,
Woo!
"What is going on here? What is going on here? What are you doing? Are you on drugs?" I'm like, "No, this is a fashion. This is what
Uh-huh.
other kids are doing." And I really, honestly, my university years were beautiful
Yeah.
on so many levels because it really sharpened also my activism
Hmm.
because it was at a time where there was a lot going on in South Africa around apartheid. And I became part of the student movement to fight injustice in the country. You know, I was part of the Student Press Union, and for years we fought to have in our manifesto to include no discrimination based on sexual orientation. And for years we were fobbed off, oh, we'll put it on the table next year. And I managed to organize queer people from all these universities that we staged a walkout if that was not included that year. And we managed this and we managed to get it implemented. So that was really huge for me.
Yeah.
And I was also on the Arts Faculty Council at my university. So there's a great woman called Bev Dizier. And in fact, Boy George did a track, I think over the pandemic it came out, which also celebrates Beth in
Ah,
the song.
cool.
And she's one of the women. Black people actually were the first to organize a queer pride in the country,
Hmm.
you know, and I was part of that movement. And I
Incredible.
remember going there and we were all scared because we were like, you didn't want your family to know what you were up to. People had covered their faces. It was a scary but exciting time, and you had a lot of these crazy religious bigots, of course, opposing this. But we didn't care. We want to change. So those were very proud moments for me.
Where did you get that courage from? Because that's a big example of courage at quite an early time.
I really don't know. I guess growing up in a place that was so prejudiced towards others
Yeah,
made me want to change things in a big way. I'm really hugely opposed to injustice, you know?
I understand. It's just remarkable to hear you being, in one level being not out, yet really out on another level of like fighting for the rights of everybody.
But by then I was out, but not to my family.
Hmm.
By then I was out at school, and I remember I had a cousin at my university who was very homophobic, and there was a queer bar that was there was a bomb threat at this queer bar, and I used to go there. And she then went to my family, said, "Yeah, she hangs around there with these people, blah blah blah." And of course, my mom was mega worried, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I still couldn't come out to her. I don't know why, and in some ways, I regret it because I only came out very late in the day with my family.
Yeah, but there's like we do the best we can with the knowledge we have at the time, and
Mm,
if you grow up in an environment where there's not really any positive role models,
mm, mm,
and there's no reason to celebrate your queerness within the
yeah.
confines of your family, it's not an easy thing to come out. I always held the hope. I always thought, oh, it'll be a shit show when I tell my mom, and then part of me was like, maybe it'll be okay. And it was a shit show. But, I kind of always held on to this little thread of hope that maybe it wouldn't be as bad as.
Yeah, I mean, I had to literally run away from home. And I realized in later years that I kept on running. And a part of me running as far away as possible from my family was this thing I carried with me, and which is who I am in essence, you know. So
Your vulnerability as well.
yeah. So in 2000, I wrote a letter, posted it to South Africa, coming out, telling them I'm in a happy relationship, blah, blah, blah. And my mom, because we used to be so close, you know, and she was like, yeah, I wondered why we were not as close as we used to be. We love you no matter what.
Wow.
You know, and it's they love Kirsten so much. It's been, yeah, I'm so fortunate.
There were times in my journey, you know, I was estranged from my mum for quite some years after coming out, and we did repair it. We did get back together, and but there were times when I kind of thought, oh, it doesn't matter if they don't get it. It doesn't matter if they don't accept me. And I think some people have to live with the reality of that. But hearing my mum love me regardless was so important. It was so
for
important.
me, it really, and I kind of like, wow, why was I so fearful? Because my mother has been this incredible person all along. Why did I doubt her? You know, but my university years were really important because they really shaped who I am and me coming to myself.
Were you DJing at that time? Had you started to collect music, or?
What happened was that I used to work at a coffee shop because my parents didn't even have money, and I was staying away from home. I mean, I had a friend who had a rich sugar daddy that was kind of sponsoring our lifestyle in a way. And my friend was like, I come with a package. If you want to be in my life.
The sugar package has to include both.
There was two friends. They come with me. Whatever I get, they need to. And this guy was really lovely. He used to take us to nice restaurants, buy us food. I had no money. So yeah, I worked in this coffee shop and I developed a really close relationship with the owner, a Greek guy. And they used to have a theater upstairs from this coffee shop and it was empty. I managed to convince him that I wanted to make a club there.
Wow.
So the wife didn't like me because she felt threatened by our friendship. I mean, which was ridiculous. Yeah, he bought a sound system. We padded the room with the eggshell, you know, those eggshells.
Oh yeah, the egg boxes.
And, yeah. And we managed for 2 years to have. We used to live on Hendon Street in an area of Johannesburg called Yeoville, and we called the club Planet Hendon.
Oh wow!
We were not business people by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he lost money. And the first night was a clear sign because at some point we were too up in the air enjoying ourselves that we didn't really take care of the bar. Our friends were rotating to serve the drinks. He had, you know, the money had to go to him for the drinks, but he let us do this crazy thing for 2 years. And I dabbled with playing records, but it was not formalized or anything like that. It was just a bunch of friends coming together that shared a passion for this music. Because when the whole party and rave thing came to South Africa, it honestly changed my life.
I hear you.
And so many of my friends' lives. You know, I remember the first rave we went to, we were like, wow, what just happened? Because this was all so new. And we just all wanted to be a part of it. We were like, no matter what it takes. I mean, Johannesburg had a really fantastic clubbing scene then. And we had a lot of queer clubs. I mean, I used to go to it. My first club was Mrs. Henderson's, which was in this incredible kind of Baroque style building. My first time I came across a dark room. This was in 1990. And then I used to go to a club called the Embassy, and there was one called Club Idols with the most caustic door person, but I love them because this club used to be frequented by very wealthy, I was in people. And me and my friends, the only people of color, we never had to queue. And these rich people would be so offended, not understanding why this guy would be so nasty to them and make them queue. And when we arrived, he would be ushering us in, kissing us.
I love it.
You know, then came Fourth World, which was like, I guess, our little music box, if I have to compare it, where, all these crazy records have been played from the UK to America, your Strictly Rhythm records and all that stuff.
Nice.
It was such a great time. I was out all the time.
She hasn't been home since. When did rave culture hit in Joburg?
1990s.
And then when was the end of apartheid?
Well, the first democratic elections were in 94, but by then people were largely ignoring what was on the table. Let's not forget, there were kind of benches in parks that were like no blacks. The beaches were divided with signs of where white people can go. But at some point, we started ignoring these things. And I moved to an area called Yeovil, which used to be a Jewish neighborhood. And all these old Jewish people then moved out and started renting their places. And this area became really the hub of artists live there, musicians, actors, also activists. And in fact, some of the people that went on to have really big roles in the post-1994 in politics in South Africa, they used to be friends. We used to hang around, drink together. So it was just an exciting time.
Mm-hmm.
And an empowering time. We didn't care. We thought we were the business,
I'm sure you were.
Yeah, 1990, there was a crew from Nottingham, actually.
Oh.
And the funny thing is that crew were friends with Grace Sands and all those people.
No way, really?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So they came and they used this old cinema. What used to be an old cinema that's been shut for years. They managed to somehow get permission to do this party.
Mm-hmm.
We all were excited, but didn't know what to expect. We all kind of got ourselves dressed up in crazy outfits, and the tickets, they had these cloth tickets that they stuck on you. That were UV.
Uh-huh.
And I remember when the party finished, people gathering in the streets to try and describe what just happened. And we recognized each other with these things. And for me, that was it.
Yeah. Because the reason I was asking about the years was, I have a bit of a theory that rave culture and ecstasy culture, I think that propelled the peace process in Northern Ireland a bit, because the generation that were experiencing that were just like, what the fuck? Like, what are we buying into? And I think it kind of accelerated. And I wondered if it was similar in Joburg, maybe with the end of apartheid and people becoming more empowered and more defiant.
Yeah, and also through all of this, I remember because there was a lot of kids for some reason, and one of the biggest DJs at the time was from Pretoria, which is like at the time really right-wing, mega right-wing, Nazi-leaning. And you'd have people on ecstasy that grew up in this area crying on your shoulders saying, I never thought it was possible for us to
That's incredible.
Relate, in this way.
That gives me a shiver. That's beautiful.
And so we were all kind of young, feeling empowered, and we didn't give a shit. We made our presence felt. Great times.
Is there a record from that time that you remember from that experience of feeling quite liberated and like empowered and from your early rave days?
Yeah, Larry Heard literally changed my life, I have to say, on so many levels. Everything that was Larry Heard related, like Washing Machine, which was such a weird track, weird, but I would say love that. But one that really touched me on a profound and deep way was like Mysteries of Love, Fingers Inc.
Oh, yeah.
that record, I was just like, wow, this is so emotional. And I remember walking around in the club, I think, crying. I felt so emotional from this music.
I remember when we were doing the party at Fabric and we invited Larry over to play and chatting with him. And there's just, he really channels a certain kind of healing and mysticism in his music. I mean, you can feel it in The Sun Can't Compare as well. I mean, I never get tired to hear that track. It's like spiritual acid house.
And he's such a beautiful human being, and it's humble, decent, and shies away from the limelight, really. He was like, as soon as he got popular and people were talking about him in Chicago and friends saying they're playing your music in the club, he decided to move away from Chicago. He just didn't want to be caught up in all of that.
That's a beautiful moment to remember. I remember my parents brought me, like, they had a wedding anniversary party and they had it in a hotel. And I think I was 11, and I kind of snuck through some doors into the disco that was happening with the adults. And it was the last track of the night, and it was Yaz, The Only Way Is Up.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's a really good talisman record to bring forward.
That's like a classic gay bar anthem. Even up to now, I bet you if you go to Canal Street, you'll hear that record.
And the 12-inch, the US 12-inch of that record is really fucking good. So you'd played a bit upstairs in the old theatre or cinema? It was upstairs at the
cafe? It used to be a theatre, then we turned it into a club,
And when did you start to think, oh, like, I'm going to play records, or I'm able to play records on a more regular basis?
Honestly, we often have this conversation with Kirsten that DJing was never a career choice in the past. Yes, there were people, that were huge, like, probably your Derek May and the likes. But for me, I was always involved in nightlife and playing music, but never actually thought of DJing as a career. And it's only really in the last 2 years that it's become so much more career-like. The new generation come into this thing when it's become a really big industry. But when we were getting into this and starting up, DJing was, yes, you DJ, but you never thought that you could make a living out of it. So
the same, I had no idea. I mean, I was listening to Carl Cox, and he came to play in Northern Ireland, and it was really a massive thing for us that he came to the club, because people didn't really visit Northern Ireland for fear of getting bombed. And then he came and was also black. And I remember being like, wow, that's incredible. But at the same time, I never really thought, like, you could have a job as a DJ. It's like, you weren't really thinking like that.
I mean, it's a really, really recent thing. And also it fascinates me now that people come up and blow up so quick. I mean, if you see any established DJ that has been doing it for long, it took them a couple of decades or so to be really established. It was a slow thing, not this fast thing.
Yeah, and there's also something there about paying your dues and doing your 10,000 hours to empty clubs and all of that. Like in Ireland, we say, be not everyone has their own trajectory and there's no right or wrong way. But in Ireland, we often say, like, beware the thing that happens too fast.
Yeah, because also working with artists, I often say, hey, these things take time, and if you want longevity, you need to be patient and work and have a clear vision, because things that often come quick then go
quick,
even quicker. So you have to build on something, and a fame that is built on no foundation doesn't last. You need a foundation, and that means putting in the time.
From Larry Heard, from being inspired of that music and connecting deeply with that when you were out, when you started to play records, was that the spirit you were trying to capture?
Yeah, for me, really, house music represented so much freedom, queerness. And so the inspiration, of course, came from people like Larry Levan, and Larry Head again. And what was happening in Chicago really just twisted my mind. And hearing all these crazy Frankie Knuckles records, with Jamie Principle, it was really exciting for me. And this is what really, and what was also happening in New York, all this culmination of, and also South Africa, up to now even.
Yeah.
Still very much influences who I am musically.
And must have been incredibly encouraging and inspiring as well to see all of that incredible music coming from the Black community as well. I mean, and the influence and the impact that it was having worldwide.
But also the interesting part was that Roland, when they were making all those machines, they were trying to market it to big established bands.
Oh.
Not to these kids in Chicago or anything like that.
I vaguely know this story, yes. Yeah.
And these kids didn't even know how to program these machines. And through mistakes, new things came. Which is why I feel really sad that now in the age of people filming, it kind of restricts people from being daring and more experimental with their approach to music because, they don't want to be seen to making a mistake. And I think it's sad because through mistakes, really incredible things can often come out of that,
Beautifully put. And I think it's the difference between an artist and a performer is that if you're an artist, you're not afraid of the flaws because they're also contributing to the moment and the journey. And, if you're going there in the spirit of watching an artist, you should have empathy for that. Whereas the performer is terrified of that. And it's also why I still love to play some vinyl or to listen to vinyl because there's always that moment where it's out. And that was always exciting for me in the club because you could hear when it goes back in. And you get the DJ's working, it's breathing, there's some life in it. And we miss that a bit. I hear you. You put that so beautifully. You kind of covered it with Larry Heard, but is there a record that you might have played in your first sets?
God, I think Can You Feel It was one of those first few records, honestly. It was so, different to anything that I came before. But what about you? I'm curious. What about you?
Oh, God. When I kind of was like I was collecting records since I was going to trade. And I was also going to this Sunday nightclub called Warriors at Turnmill. So I kind of
Oh my God, I remember Warriors. I lived with two people that used to go to Warriors.
Did you?
They were at Central St. Martin's at the time. Trade, I've only been maybe twice.
I kind of was in the harder room at Trade and then I migrated into the Light Lounge, which was more kind of like soulful house.
Because I remember Trade being very intense. There was this intense energy.
Very intense. And a bit, we have to remember that at that time, there was a lot of straight acting. In a way, it was slightly in revolt of HIV. There was this emphasis to look really buff and really healthy. And along with that came this thing of not looking too gay. There was a lot of self-internalized homophobia within those times. And then I was going to Warriors. I didn't realize at the time Warriors was a response. It was about being a HIV warrior, about guys who were positive finding empowerment and a community within themselves. I didn't know that at the time, but Spike, the guy behind it, was
I remember.
That was his mission, which was also very courageous at the time. I was also going to squat parties and stuff that was happening in East London. I had been to Sud Electronic as well.
Oh my God.
That was a wee bit later. Yeah, but you didn't do that for so long, Sud Electronic, because I remember that was such
11 years.
Oh, you did 11 years. That was the birth of Shoreditch, really.
11 years we're moving it around and around and to different venues because those days when the licensing 24 licensing laws came, people thought, wow, things will be easier. Actually, it became more difficult to do illegal parties in London.
Do you know, it's funny because I remember the whole nag, nag, nag thing, the Electroclash. I was very...
This is when I met you, was when you used to play at Nag, 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 Love
And
those
I mean
days.
that was kind of the birth of my starting to collect
Mm,
and think seriously
mm,
about playing
mm.
music. And I think there was also this crossover between, like, I think I met Kenny Campbell there as well, and he might have been going to
Yeah,
study electronics.
yeah. Kenny, bless him, still going and still, I love that person so much.
I always tell Kenny he's club royalty.
He is, because
He is.
Kenny has literally lived through some of the most important subcultures within club music. You know, he was part of the whole new romantics thing.
She has stories, that one. She has
I
stories.
know, and that's one of the things I wanted to do was bring down the walls to hear Kenny's stories because they are fascinating. Because while being part of that new romantics thing, he was also going deep south to black nightclubs in places that were not probably the safest of places for a queer young man. But he lives and breathes music, and it's so inspiring to see him still fully
Yeah.
committed.
A musical critique from Kenny is, you want to get on the right side of that because she knows her stuff.
Kenny has achieved so much and so humble in so many ways. And a lot of people, don't know what Kenny has done and has achieved.
Yeah, and he's not the one to run about and shout it.
Yeah.
I'm interested, because we're on the road a lot, and I think
Mm,
there's a lot to be said about our job where it's in other people's social lives,
mm,
and that's already something to navigate.
mm,
But then also, as queer people, I think the statistics are that we're 3 times more likely to experience mental health issues, addiction,
mhm, mhm,
depression. I can speak
mm,
firsthand of my own
mm,
experiences of
mm.
those things. And I'm interested to ask you about your sanity practices, as a queer person in the world, and also, being on tour, traveling a lot. There's a lot of
Mm,
isolation there.
mm,
Do you have things
mm.
that keep you sane?
Honestly, my one of my things is to switch off. At
Uh-huh.
some point, we need to switch off and remove yourself from the whole social aspect of things because we give a lot. It's DJing and all of this thing. Whilst it's so joyous for me, it also takes out a lot of energy from you. So I make it a ritual to have me time where I'm not engaging, I'm locked in the house and just recover and embrace the silence,
Uh-huh.
because life is moving at such a fast pace anyway. Never mind the DJ thing. So I really make time for myself where I'm like, okay, these are my days where I'm not picking up the phone. I'm
Hmm.
not engaging in any way. I'm just trying to come back to myself and bring the emotions down a bit, temper the emotions, because it's an
Yeah.
emotional thing, this thing.
Do you ever get crashes after gigs? Do you ever?
I do. Honestly, this is what I normally say to friends when I'm playing, they come.
Yeah.
Because when you're playing that 4 hours or whatever, you running on adrenaline. And as soon as you stop, I'm like, oh my God, I need just a moment to come back to
Hmm.
myself, guys. I'm not being rude, but I need to bring everything back to normal, you know?
Yeah, I sometimes get like emotional lows after, but because
Mm-hmm.
there's a rhythm to it, I kind of see that after
Mm-hmm.
gigs, I kind of know what to do. Like I take myself off and I sit in the steam room, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like, I just put myself in environments where I have to be
Mm-hmm.
in the body and not in my head too much, where I
Mm-hmm.
can just
Mm-hmm.
let it all hit and kind of, I mean, for me back in the day, it used to be like I would smoke a joint and just kind of switch off, but I've had to find
Mm-hmm.
ways to switch off without those kind of, without substances now, which has also been like quite a big journey.
It's interesting that you mention weed because I've just decided to give up recently.
Oh, wow.
It was easier than I thought.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, easier than I thought, and honestly, I sleep better.
Yeah.
I'm having quality sleep, and as opposed to falling asleep when you're not ready and waking up fully clothed, and
Yeah.
having or sleeping in a terrible position. just because you're too stoned. Yeah, we need moments of clarity. It's so important.
I know, like, for both of us, we don't plan to be the center of attention in the room. The music is the focus, but you can't help but like take all that energy and transform that energy. There's a channeling that happens when you're a DJ. Like how you feel when you DJ is really important because people feel it.
Of course, it's an exchange, and you need to be able to open yourself up as well to the audience. It's not a selfish thing that, I'm here performing, you got to listen to me. It's a constant negotiation with the crowd. And the more you open yourself up to them, the more receptive they are as well. Isn't it fascinating?
The worst thing for me is to fly in and go straight to the gig.
I can't do that.
I did it recently, and it's just too much stimulation. Like I need this 2-hour nap or Netflix or whatever it is. I need this like.
Because this past weekend, actually, we had to do something like that, which was really stressful. We were playing at Buttons and Cocktail, then came back to pack, and just within an hour we were gone because we were playing in Florence in the evening. And then from Florence, we were like, okay, there was an option that they pay an extra day because the flight times were very awkward. But honestly, we were like, I'd rather not sleep. And then we went back to the hotel, packed and left. It was bloody hard, but I really wanted to be home.
Yeah.
There's something driving me. I was like, I need to be in my own bed. I miss my own bed very often when you're on a longer tour, because a hotel bed is not the same as your bed.
You could be staying in the Ritz and you would still rather have your bed.
Because there's something comforting about your own space, Before traveling a lot, I mean, as a kid, I was fascinated by hotels. Wow, I want to be in a hotel. But now, especially when I'm on my own, they can often be very lonely as well.
They can be lonely. And also, when you're experiencing those moments after the gig and you're in a hotel room, it can be quite lonely.
Yeah.
I was chatting yesterday with FKA M4A, and I've been on tour with them quite a bit. And they're quite a newer generation of DJing, and they bring their pajamas, and it's the most adorable thing. Like I've knocked their hotel room before, and they come out in their pajamas.
My God, that is so cute!
It's so cute, and I was like, "You're in your PJs," and they were like, "Yeah, I always bring my pajamas," and it's like the most adorable thing in the world.
That's really cute, yeah.
Is there a record at the moment that you're playing a lot, or that you're excited about playing this summer?
What record am I excited to play this summer? I know what I'm playing. Actually, I've rediscovered a DJ Juke record, which is incredible, so magical. And it goes on and on and on and on. It's called Amor.
Okay.
And it's around, I think it hits, over 12 minutes, nearly 13 minutes long.
Oh, nice. I want to hear that.
And that's the one that I've been playing a lot. It's pumping, but it also has this really spiritual thing going on in the it's a beautiful record. So
there is that in your sound. There's like I would call it, I'm always a bit funny about the word spirituality because I think it gets a bit tainted, but I can feel the spirit in what you do. There is that connection of empowerment and celebration, like all the things that radiate from you. And also like talking to the things that are important to you. You can hear that in your music.
Oh, you are so sweet.
Which is, it's funny, isn't it? Because like DJ sets are like a little bit of like a Polaroid.
It lives into our souls in a sense,
I must say, like, it's just an absolute joy chatting with you. It's been a pleasure to like learn a bit more and connect a bit more on these kind of valuable things. And I feel like energized chatting to you.
No, I really enjoyed this.
It's such a pleasure. You've been listening to Queerly Beloved with me, Cormac. You can find the playlist of all the music featured in today's episode in the episode description. And while you're there, please do hit subscribe so you don't miss out on my conversations with other talented people. A big thank you to Michael Lane, my producer, my manager, Melissa Taylor at Tailored Communication, and of course to Amazon Music for their support. Take care of yourself. All the best. Bye.